And Senator Fuller, I want to welcome you to the Budget Subcommittee. Because this is the first committee, probably useful to just walk through a couple of procedural issues in terms of how we're going to manage the committee over the course of the next few weeks and the next few months. As I think everyone in the room knows, we are working on an extraordinarily expedited schedule, so we're planning 3 weeks of subcommittee hearings leading to anticipated state action sometime in late February on these items. We do anticipate returning in the spring for additional oversight and budget adjustments. We're hoping to close every department and taking votes to either approve or deny budget proposals as we move forward. A little less inclined, given the circumstances, to hold items open. In some cases, we will be looking for a motion to deny without prejudice, which is a way to essentially bring an item back this spring, either for a more in-depth discussion or with a revised proposal. The risk of stating the obvious, new positions in this budget climate are going to have to be considered quite carefully, and really there's a strong burden of proof, I think, on new positions. One personal request from the chair, and that is if you're using an acronym, would you please use the full title, name, agency description, and then give us the acronym. I'd like to say that that's so that members of the public can follow more easily, but the truth of the matter is it's so I and other committee members can follow more easily as we make our way through the various alphabet agencies, entities, and programs. And with that in mind, we're going to begin with the energy agencies, followed by Cal EPA. We have folks from the LAO's office, yes, and when the time comes to speak, if you would introduce yourselves for everyone here at the table and in the public. Department of Finance represented as well, and why don't we bring PUC to the table first. So we've got a couple of items for vote only. For those of you who are new to this process, we try to identify items that either are not controversial or which may be well controversial but already pretty well understood and where additional discussion is not necessary. If there's an item for committee members where you would like to have some discussion, committee members just need to speak up and say, could we have a conversation about that particular item? Same's true for departments and agencies or members of the public. If there's a vote-only item and you'd like to make sure we have some conversation, just stand up and look anxious, and we'll figure it out from there, all right? First couple of items under vote only are on page 2 of the published agenda. These are BCP Budget Control number 4 and BCP 5, and these are both recommended for vote only. And if we could get a motion to that effect.
Move the agenda items, the BCP 4 and the BCP 5.
All right. And unless there's a concern, let's call the roll.
Senator Subcommittee.
Aye.
Senator Fuller. Senator Lowenthal.
Aye.
And those pass 2-0. Thank you. Then that takes us to the discussion items, the first of which is item number 3. This is BCP 1. And why don't we ask, this is the Diablo Canyon Seismic Study Peer Review Panel. Why don't we ask the LAO to introduce themselves and to tee this issue up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tiffany Roberts, Legislative Analyst Office. The Governor has requested an increase of $500,000 in reimbursable consultant services in order to have a seismic study conducted by PG&E reviewed by a third-party consultant. And what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of background, some context for this issue. Back in 2006, the legislature passed a bill, AB 1632, which required the Energy Commission to evaluate the vulnerability of the state's 2 nuclear power plants to seismic activity. And as part of that process, seismic studies of Diablo Canyon were conducted. As part of a set of recommendations, the Energy Commission recommended that a follow-up seismic study be conducted of Diablo Canyon. Now, during the same time period, PG&E began the process of applying for Diablo Canyon's license renewal. And as part of that process, the Public Utilities Commission required PG&E to comply with the Energy Commission's recommendation, from AB 1632, which was to conduct an additional seismic study. However, the Public Utilities Commission did not have the technical expertise to review the results of that study, and as such, they have requested $500,000 to hire a third-party outside consultant to review that study for them. But in reviewing this issue, what we've found is that there are experts within state government who have the technical expertise to conduct this review for the Public Utilities Commission. And that's the Department of Conservation's California Geological Survey. And in speaking with the Department of Conservation, they've advised us of their ability to potentially review that study at a lower cost. Therefore, we do recommend that the committee deny the budget proposal as requested and have the administration return with a revised lower cost proposal.
Let me ask the Commission to respond, give their reaction to the LAO's comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm Paul Clannon. I'm going to move farther away from that. The Executive Director at the Public Utilities Commission. And I've got a couple of folks with me today. Let me introduce them just as they're needed. And the first is Julie Fitch, who's the Director of the Commission's Energy Division, and she'll walk us through this issue.
Good morning. I'm Julie Fitch. Basically, the way we're looking at this, we have the responsibility at the PUC to review the cost proposals that PG&E would bring forward as a result of the relicensing of Diablo Canyon. And so we need someone to look at the seismic studies that were recommended. We're indifferent in a way to who does it. It's definitely the case that there is expertise elsewhere in state government. It's also definitely the case that there's not expertise at the PUC on staff. We're not asking for staffing resources, but we were asking for the reimbursable funding so that we could hire a consultant to take a look at the studies. My understanding is we also the Commission also set up this independent peer review panel, and there have been several meetings of that group, and we had anticipated other agencies bringing forward expertise, but in this budget climate, we're getting the feedback that they also don't have resources, and although they might like to contribute, they basically don't have the staffing or the budget themselves. So to us, it appears as though either way, there needs to be some authority for additional funding for incremental work. We thought that the best way to do that was basically reimbursable authority to have PG&Es to actually fund the work.
If we could explore this issue of the peer review panel, LAO, do you have any comments on this? It's not altogether clear to me. There has been a peer review panel. There has been participation by other state agencies. There's now a question about whether or not they're going to continue to participate. Where are we on this? What's the issue here?
There have been a couple of meetings, and our understanding from the other agencies who came to the first couple of meetings is that they were not going to continue to participate because of resource constraints. We've been exploring whether, if we were to get this additional budget authority, whether we could use it to fund some of their activities. We're open to that. But nothing has been nailed down yet.
LAO on this point, the peer review panel, any comments?
No, not at this point. I would say that it's probably necessary for the administration to review amongst themselves what the appropriate route might be. Again, knowing that there is the technical expertise within the state government to do such work, I think I would be inclined to look to do this at a lower cost.
Well, two different issues. The first issue is the issue of the whether or not outside consultants at this cost are the appropriate way to deal with the need. Second issue is the peer review panel and its ability to function with appropriate participation from various departments or agencies. Can someone tell me whether the peer review panel is created by statute? This was an effort just to pull people together with some expertise? Finance, you want to weigh in on this one? Apparently not. Yes, no?
Yeah, this is a new issue for us as well at this moment. I mean, about the peer review panel, we don't have a proposal before us at this time regarding the peer review panel.
I can answer the question about how it was created. It was created by a commission decision. It was to attempt to take advantage of the expertise that existed.
So you threw a party and nobody wanted to come. Is that what happened?
More or less, yes.
Okay. All right. Senator Lowenthal?
No, I didn't understand. I guess the point is there's the peer. You invited other agencies to help do the review once the analysis is done, because you asked for either outside money. LAO is saying, hey, maybe we can do it within state government. I didn't understand what these costs are going to be to this other agencies. They're not doing the analysis. They're just reviewing it. Why did they decide to drop out?
I can't speak for them, but my understanding was basically they have resource constraints and other work that they need to do, and they just didn't have the time or ability to devote to this.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Justin McGuinn with Finance. It's our understanding that while conservation does have expertise, they don't have, that the staff aren't sitting around waiting for something to do. They are otherwise occupied. And so what, in my discussion with the analyst on that assignment, is that it would require them to contract for staff to do this, probably 2 to 4 staff for about 4 months at a cost of up to $250,000. So it would be less expensive on its face, but at the same time, it's still the same process of needing to give PG&E the authority for the contract dollars, to PUC, to give them the contract dollars from, and the source of that money is PG&E, and then enter into an interagency agreement or other contract with conservation. They would then need to enter into a contract with consultants and then begin the work.
All right. The staff recommendation is to deny the proposal and to request the PUC to return with, number one, a revised lower cost proposal that would use the services of the California Geological Survey, and then number two, to see if we can't find a way to include other state agencies in the peer review panel, which thus far has apparently proven to be a challenge. Chair is prepared to support the staff recommendation. Are there any other questions, comments from the Commission further? Senator Lowenthal, are you the chair would entertain a motion to that effect?
Absolutely, to
All right.
that effect.
All right. Motion by Lowenthal. Call the roll. Motion is to deny with the request for CPUC to return as indicated.
Senator Simitian.
Aye.
Senator Fuller.
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal.
Aye.
3-0. All right. Thank you. That takes us to the modernization of the electric grid. This is item number 4 on page 5 of our published agenda. And why don't we ask the LAO to tee this issue up as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The governor's requested 2 positions and $229,000 to develop and implement energy storage policies. Last year, AB 2514, which was a Skinner bill, an energy storage bill, was signed into law, and it authorized the PUC to develop energy storage targets. However, with this BCP, the administration has failed to include any workload analysis of the energy storage work that they've done to date. And instead, they've cited a 2007 federal legislation as a justification for this BCP. We're still unclear as to why the PUC cited this particular legislation instead of the Skinner AB 2514 legislation. And as such, until the PUC or Public Utilities Commission provides some sort of adequate workload justification for this BCP, we recommend that you deny without prejudice this request and have the department return in the spring with an updated proposal.
All right. Commission response?
I just wanted to explain a little bit about the sequencing of this request. As the chair will recall, we actually had a request for 3 positions last year in the budget, and we were granted 1 limited term position for storage work. So we actually submitted this BCP as a follow-on to that request from last year. We still think we need 3 positions to initiate the work. This request was submitted before the AB 2514 was signed into law, so it does not include reference to AB 2514 because of that sequencing.
All right, let me, as you will recall from the conversation last year, the chair was supportive of the item and had to go to bat to round up just that 1 position for you, given the fact
we appreciate
that
that.
Almost no one else in the room, as I recall, was interested in moving forward. before I can go to bat for you a second time, I do think we need a little more clarity about what the program is, how these folks are going to be used, and how they will now work to advance the statutory goals that have been articulated by the legislature. So the motion here is to deny without prejudice, ask that you come back in the spring with an updated proposal that reflects the recent legislation. But again, let me just be very clear. I think this is the future. I think we ought to get started on it sooner rather than later. I made that case last year, but I think it's been clear that LAO and the committee members themselves have been reticent about authorizing funding in this area without a clear sense of how the dollars are going to be used. So help me help you is my plea to you today. Comments or questions on this item from committee members? Finance? Anything else from the PUC? The chair would gratefully entertain a motion to deny without prejudice.
So moved.
Motion by Lowenthal. Call the roll.
Senator Smitty?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
3-0. Motion to deny is approved. We look forward to seeing a carefully fleshed out proposal next time around. That takes us to item number 5 on page 6, and this is BCP 3, Natural Gas Distribution Safety Program. And I think we've got fairly clear indication in the published agenda and the staff notes here. I guess I think we all realize the pipeline failure in September last year has obviously prompted the proposal, and no question that the issue is an important one. I think a lot of this is going to be discussed in the policy committees in both houses during the course of this legislative year. Why don't we ask you to present the issue and with some discussion, please, about sort of where the number 4 came from, and it seems, notwithstanding my earlier admonition about new positions, it seems modest given what the emerging scope of the challenge appears to be.
Mr. Chairman, again, I'm Paul Clannon, Executive Director at the PUC, and I'll be turning in a moment to Rich Clark, who's the Director of this program area for the Commission. But let me just get started to say that the September 9th explosion in San Bruno has captured an immense amount of attention at the Public Utilities Commission, obviously. As you make note, there will be a lot of legislative activity, both state and also at the federal level, as the investigation continues by the National Transportation Safety Board and the Public Utilities Commission. And as we learn more, I'm expecting a pretty vigorous statewide and national debate about this program. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion both at the policy level, at the budget level, at every level about this. We know already that based on federal formulas and the way that California is situated with respect to its mobile home parks and its natural gas transmission and distribution systems, that the federal competent agency, which is part of the Department of Transportation, I'm going to pronounce the acronym, but then I'm going to say what it is. PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. PHMSA is part of the Federal Department of Transportation. They oversee the state work in these areas. We enforce the federal laws. They have a formula that they calculate. It's a complex one, and we've not always agreed with its results, but it is where we got the 4 from. So before we were able administratively to establish these positions with the help of the administration, and some discussions with members of this House as well a month or two ago, we had 9 inspectors doing this work. There's a lot of history leading up to those 9, and I can go into it if you like. The federal formula suggests that California, just to do the program that existed before the San Bruno explosion, should have somewhere in the neighborhood of 12. So we requested 3 new inspectors plus a lead inspector to get us up to and slightly over the federal formula level. And that's where the 4 came from. I'm extremely confident that those 4 people who are now hired, by the way, beginning to do the job, that they'll be very helpful in helping to ensure safety. But I don't think this is the end of the discussion. And let me just introduce Rich Clark, who is the director of this program area for the Public Utilities Commission.
Mr. Clark, welcome. Any comments in addition?
I think Executive Director Clannon has covered the turf here pretty well. Thank you, sir.
Right. LAO, comments, questions? Finance? We do have a letter I just want to mention from Senator Padilla, the chair of the Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee, in support of the recommendation. We have a favorable staff recommendation as well. Are there questions or comments from members of the committee? Senator Lowenthal,
Move approval.
Senator Fuller, any questions before we move to a vote?
Actually, I was just getting caught up as a new person on what exactly how it is that they can already be hired, and we're approving them now, but I think I'm kind of clear on that.
Well, why don't we ask that question and let them... Chair.
I'll turn to finance, the leading experts on this question. It's a good one, and I can tell you it's an unusual situation, and I wish I could use more often, and not just as a result of a catastrophe like this.
Kathy Madison, Department of Finance. The administration has the ability to administratively establish a position, and it's good for the fiscal year. So we use that in order to establish the 4 positions.
So did I understand you correctly that the individuals have already been hired then? Okay, so what happens if this commission doesn't approve them? I agree that we need them. This is for another day.
No, I think this is a good discussion to have, and just briefly, finance will correct me, but I think what we're doing here is requesting the funding authority to maintain agency support of those positions. What I have now is 4 positions that have been created that don't have budget authority behind them. So if the legislature should choose and the governor should choose not to fund those positions going forward, then the agency would either come with a redirect, with a budget change proposal to redirect and ask in that way, or we would be faced with the possibility of not being able to support those positions. But finance should correct me if that's wrong.
The nature of administratively established positions is that they all expire on June 30th of the fiscal year. Should the commission not, or the committee not approve the funding, those positions will be terminated.
On June 30th.
On June 30th. And given the nature of the process, they would be without positions likely until they do another BCP, budget change proposal, for fiscal year 12-13, and we'd be back. But they would lose a year, and they would probably lose those people that are already in place. So should the committee not fund them, they would be terminated.
Thank you.
All right, then. We have a motion to approve from Senator Lowenthal. And by the way, if there are members of the public who wish to speak on any of these items, please just stand and take a place in the center aisle and walk slowly and non-threateningly towards the front. We'll call on you, all right? Call the roll, please.
Senator Simitian.
Aye.
Senator Fuller.
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal.
Aye.
All right, that takes care of that item as well. Before you step away, PUC, Senator Lowenthal, I believe you had an item you wanted to raise.
Yeah. I was somewhat surprised and actually taken back when I learned that the regulatory agency, the CPUC, was creating a foundation to fundraise from the very programs that it regulates. I think at best it's unseemly. At worst, it raises real issues of questions the public trust in the ability of the CPUC to act independently. The questions I have are: was this done at a public meeting, the creation? Were there ever guidelines on who could or could not contribute to this, or was maybe there is a reason to have this kind of fund to pay for parties and other things, but did you set up guidelines, or was guidelines that who could contribute to this? And will the legislature have any oversight over the use of any of these funds in this, especially if they're going to be used for salaries or as it was pointed out in the paper, to reward deserving staffers? What role will the legislature play?
Senator, thank you very much for giving me the chance to clear the air a little bit on this issue. So I think we've all read the articles in the paper yesterday and today about this issue. So let me dispel some misinformation in those articles. The PUC did not approve, was never asked to approve, has no approval relationship with this foundation. Foundation was created by private citizens. Two members of the board happen to be former PUC commissioners, and the third is
Didn't it not say this was the brainchild of the chair?
Is an attorney. Yeah, the idea has floated around before, and there are other examples of it. The one that's been cited is the State Parks
And they do regulatory
Foundation.
work too?
No.
State parks, they raise money from those that they regulate? I don't believe that's so.
I don't know, but so let me turn to the question of how it's raising money. So there's a dinner tonight that's sponsored by a different committee, also by not sanctioned by the PUC, not created by the PUC, not approved by the PUC, but including some former PUC staffers, some former PUC commissioners, to commemorate the first 100 years of the Public Utilities Commission. This month happens to be the 100th anniversary of the creation of the PUC by the progressive Governor Hiram Johnson. So that dinner has been scheduled for about a year, is when the planning for that came up. It's raised funds in various ways. I bought a ticket. I'm going to the dinner tonight.
Utilities paying $20,000.
I've read that report too, and I don't have any reason to think that it's not the case. But it's not just utilities; it's also the Utility Reform Network is a sponsor of the dinner. The Green Lining Coalition is a sponsor of the dinner. It isn't just utilities. The way I understand it is the dinner was not conceived as a fundraiser for the foundation. They are two separate things. But I understand that the committee organizing the dinner has planned or decided in some way that if there are funds left over after covering costs, that they'll be given to the foundation as sort of seed money. What's the foundation going to do? I can just go by what they've said in their incorporation papers. They're a 501c3. What they're talking about in there is education, basically, education around the PUC mission of the public, and also, I think, also of PUC itself. Too, I've met with some of the organizers, and what they talk about is things like scheduling seminars, bringing in outside guest speakers, and so on. So, it's being portrayed in the press in ways that are first factually wrong, and then that lead you to exactly the kinds of concerns that I think you have, Senator. So I hope I've allayed some of those. I would love to come and talk to you more and perhaps bring in some of the organizers of the foundation so that they can tell you in their own words what they plan to do.
Senator Lowenthal, this just came up, of course, off agenda because of the press reports. If you like, I get the sense that the folks from the PUC would like the opportunity to clarify what is and isn't underway. We could, I think we can appropriately agendize this at a future time and work with committee staff and your staff, LAO and finance, as well as Ms. Fuller's staff as well, to pull together some questions, share the questions with the PUC, and then perhaps have them come back with a written report. I think the nexus, if you will, with this committee is that this is clearly a funding issue for PUC, and this is the place where we have those conversations. And so I think if you and I see what I think is a nodding and concurring head from Ms. Fuller, why don't we go ahead and just indicate that we'll tee this up for discussion sometime in the next. I think we can do this one in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Staff enthusiastically agrees we can get it done in the next couple of weeks. Okay, great. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think that covers the PUC items. And that brings us to the California Energy Commission. We have a traffic jam. Okay. Welcome. We have one item that is proposed for vote only. This is item number 1 on page 7 of our published agenda. This is for the budget change proposal number 1, extend limited term State Energy Program American Recovery and Reinvestment Act positions. Can we get a motion on the vote only if there's no comment from public or staff?
Move vote only.
All right, we have a motion from Senator Lowenthal on the vote only item. Please call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
And that passes 3-0. That takes us to item number 2, page 8 of our published agenda. These are discussion items, and I think it's fair to say there's some question and concern about the recent rate increase. As I understand it, at the November 8th, 2010 meeting, the Commission approved an increase to the Energy Resources Program account surcharge, which became effective January 1 of this year. My notes indicate that the rate increase is expected to generate $8.4 million in the current year and $16.9 million in 2011-12. And the calculation indicates in our staff report that the rate increase was, by my calculation, about 30%, 30+%, and that the budget increase ends up netting out around 20%. So let's start by asking the commission members or representatives to introduce themselves, and this came as a little bit of a surprise to folks. So I guess the question I would ask is, was this raised? I don't recall this being raised last year as a possibility. All right, then what's the basis? Why don't we ask you to introduce yourself and just start there?
I'm Melissa Jones, Executive Director of the Energy Commission, and there was a shortfall in ERPA revenues this year because of lower energy demand usage in the state, driven both by the economic downturn and also by some of the efficiency programs that we've put in. And again, last year was a fairly cool summer. Those are the three main drivers of demand. So as the demand goes down, then our surcharge goes down. That decline, when we found out in August, late August, that decline was 7% for that 1 year. That's the lowest dip in energy consumption in the Commission's history, in the ERPA's history. So at the time when we were doing the governor's budget, we had projected out our revenues for several years based on a flat growth, assuming that there would continue to be economic problems, but it wouldn't decline. It would be flat, and that proved to be true for the first 2 years. But this year it dropped dramatically, and so the drop was already showed through 06, 07, and 08, 09. Let's see, the size of the reduction was unanticipated. The ERPA revenue growth rate over the last 16 years has been 1.366%. So we're normally used to either a low growth or steady. Again, as I said, the economy, weather, and our efficiency standards contributed to that decline in energy consumption and therefore the decline in our revenues.
Is my calculation of the increase correct? I'm looking at .00022 to .00029. Some basic arithmetic would suggest that that's about a 35% increase.
Yes, it is, and let me put it in context for you. This charge increases the average annual household cost by 3.3 cents per month or 40 cents per year.
Let me go back to 35%.
Okay.
What's the if I were to say, why do you need a 35% rate increase? The answer to that question would be why.
Mark Hutchison, Deputy Director for Administration. The percentage you quote is correct. What's not reflected in the write-up here is that the Energy Commission shares this fund with a number of other funds, and collectively they have their expenditures have exceeded the revenues for the last couple of years, and there were some savings, I guess forced savings, that occurred to delay this revenue increase. That has to do with furloughs, contracting cuts, operating cuts, position cuts. So all those kind of played into this delay. As
the other departments mentioned.
Right, and those other departments are Department of Water Resources. I'm drawing a blank here.
Department of Conservation.
All right, but your proposed base budget, as I understand it, is looking to go up 20% for your base budget.
That there is a revenue increase. We aren't proposing any baseline program increases for the budget year. This is strictly to fund existing operations for us and the other departments in the fund, and also provide a prudent 5% reserve in the fund.
Other members of the committee on this item? The Staff recommendation, LAO, excuse me, I should weigh in here. LAO, comments? Finance? Staff recommendation is to reduce budget item 3360-001-0465 by 8.4 million, the amount anticipated, and require the CEC to come back in the spring with an explanation and some discussion of the fund condition that's a little more formal and detailed than the conversation we're able to have on the fly here today. And the program's funded by the surcharge and the impacts of the surcharge increase. I guess in a minute I'm going to ask for a motion to that effect, but was there discussion about further economies that might be made in the organization? I mean, again, these are 35% is a pretty healthy increase, and the IRPA proposed base budget, by my calculation, is going up, putting aside this issue of other players, by about 20%.
Well, I can tell you about some of the actions that we did take. We reduced our workload to the account of about $2 million. The furloughs, of course, contributed reductions. We reduced our contract expenditures. We reduced our vehicle operations by 50%. We cut back on our IT expenditures and also travel, training, and other related matters. So we did look at our operating budget and try to cut as much as we could so that we would have to raise it the least that we had to.
All right. If there aren't any other, sir?
Senator, Kyle Amy,
we can use that microphone right there. Just pull it. It'll pull right up, and it'll be easier for you if you actually step down.
Okay.
It's not ergonomically designed for you, but there you go.
Good morning. Kyle Amy, Energy Commission Budget Officer.
Thank you.
Just a comment to the increase in our budget appropriation, your reference to 20%. I think you're referring the prior to the current year. In the governor's budget, the reduction is showing IRPA savings as a result of furloughs, prudent management of the IRPA reserves. Going forward in 10-11 and 11-12, the IRPA baseline is projected to be flat. There's no recommended increase in revenues over the 2 years.
All right. Let's get this reconciled. And again, I'll ask for motion in support of the staff recommendation. Yes, I'm sorry. Ms. Fuller. Senator Fuller.
I'm new. I'm a little confused. Okay, so you met your mission, and energy consumption went down, which is what we're trying to achieve. But cost did not go down? It seems to me that I'm just a little confused. If the need goes down, it seems like we would find some reductions. Otherwise, if consumption goes up, are then we going to reduce? I'm just a little confused about how it works.
The amount that we collect from the IRPA surcharge, the legislature authorized us every November to evaluate the state of the fund and change it if it was necessary. Energy consumption being down doesn't change the fact that the Energy Commission has a number of mandated functions that it still has to carry out. And so that's what those funds are used for. Does that help any?
Yes, and so it throws the ball back to us, I guess. We're going to eventually reduce our mandates if we succeed in our goals to reduce our consumption. I don't know. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Maybe this had been answered before, but what exactly will be the impact to the ratepayer?
It is 40 cents a year on average.
Do we have a motion?
Yes, I move to reduce the budget item by $8.4 million.
All right, and we require CEC to return to spring hearings.
With an explanation and discussion of the fund.
And could we engage the LAO on this item as well as our committee staff and finance? Love to have your input as well. Call the roll on the motion.
Senator Smitty?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
And there's some other items that we've asked for your clarification on as well, I believe.
Do you want that now?
No. That's all part of the further discussion. All right. That takes us to Air Resources Board. We have discussion items here. Legislative proposal number 1. have a little budget jargon here that would help if we clarify just at the front end. We've got a staff recommendation regarding your request to deny the proposal to extend the liquidation of funds beyond the 3 years of encumbrance. And the primary issue here is legislative oversight and the ability to make sure going forward that we're able to sort of track the use of the funds and that they're consistent with legislative direction. But for the chair, the starting point is, what does liquidation really mean in this case? What are we talking about?
Means moving the money to the project
Making contracts?
contract, or which is usually an air district in many cases, and then getting them to expend it.
What's the difference between an encumbrance and a liquidation? I got 3 years proposed of encumbrance, and then I got 3 years proposed of liquidation.
Okay.
So what am I doing in the first instance? What am I doing in the second instance? And how are the two different?
Okay. You want to take it?
Sure.
Okay. I'm James Goldstein, Executive Officer. Bob Fletcher, Deputy Executive
Welcome.
Officer.
Thank you.
Encumbrance is essentially the process of ensuring that the money is in some sort of grant agreement with the local air pollution control districts that they then are contracting with various entities to do the projects. The actual liquidation of the money is when it leaves an account and goes into another account for distribution to the trucker or the port operator or whoever actually does the project. We typically don't liquidate the money until the project is essentially completed, so that the money stays in an account and that we don't release it until the project is done. And that ensures that there's a cash management consideration there, and part of the issue on liquidation and the timing is consistency with the local district's requirements that have 4 years after their own encumbrance process to liquidate the money. And so part of it's a question of whether the money sits in the state bank or in the local district's bank.
Well, and as I indicated, part of it's a question of how we keep track of the use of the funds and make sure that they're being used for purposes consistent with the original authorization.
We do make regular reports to my board on the status of the Prop 1B monies, and to avoid acronyms, Prop 1B is the Highway Safety, Traffic Reduction, Air Quality, and Port Security Bond Act of 2006.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The 1B funds.
The 1B funds, or the Goods Movement Emission Reduction Program. And so we are always giving updates to my board several times a year on this. All the information about the project types, where the money's going, is on our website with pie charts and lists and things like that. So we're very open about how the monies are expended, and we like sharing that because it's actually a very good news story about we've had tremendous success with the program.
LAO, any comments on this one? And then to finance, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the typical time for liquidation is a 3-year period. The committee is going to want to balance this oversight issue with the potential impact that a 3-year liquidation period could have on these longer-term projects. As an alternative, what you might want to consider is basically having 2 reappropriations so that you can take into consideration what portion of projects are longer term versus what portion of projects or shorter term projects. So for example, if 25% of the projects are longer term projects, you can associate up 25% of your funds with a 7-year liquidation term and the remainder with a 3-year liquidation term. Yesterday in the Assembly we did have discussions, and based on their direction we're going to be working with the board as well as with the Department of Finance and staff to come up with some sort of plan that would allow for the board to address this reappropriation so that you could reappropriate in 2 different amounts.
I'm sorry.
Let me go to finance next, if I may, please.
Susan Montoya, Department of Finance. Prior practice in prior budget acts has been to give the extended encumbrance and liquidation period due to the nature of some of the projects, ports infrastructure in particular, requiring the long lead time. I'd like to add on to what was said earlier by the Air Board, because the encumbrance is essentially a commitment, at least in my view, to the local districts to commit the money for which there's a local match. And the liquidation is following through as the project progresses to send the cash to the local districts. The statute that rules this program gives the local districts an extended period of time to liquidate. What is trying to be avoided in this instance is a mismatch between the state having to push the money out and the local district not having to expend the funds, with the intent not to have the local districts essentially sitting on the money before the projects are ready to go. One other technical point I'd like to raise, I just want to be clear that the staff recommendation is 3 years to encumber and 3 years to liquidate.
Okay. Let me go to other members of the committee here in a moment, but I just, larger discussion for, another time and another place perhaps, but, I'm pleased that you keep your board fully informed. The challenge we have is to provide the oversight function, which frankly has suffered over the last decade here in the legislature. I can understand why the administration is not as anxious about that as the legislature is, but there's an oversight function that really is, I think, important to not only ensuring that the funds are spent wisely and appropriately, but to ensuring some degree of public trust, which frankly isn't very high with respect to the way government at every level, and state government in particular, spends its funding. I think that problem is further aggravated by term limits. Senator Fuller is, I think, our fourth member of the Republican caucus in just the 2.5 years that I've been sitting on the committee, and so it presents a further challenge. I say this with the vast experience of 2 years on the committee now. So it presents a further challenge in terms of oversight. I think LAO indicates that there's some conversation about this issue on the Assembly side as well. What I'd like to suggest is that we approve the staff recommendation, have further conversations, and see if this can't get worked out in conference in a way that works for all parties concerned. Understand the desire not to either rush the money out or have people sitting on the money, but I am anxious about this oversight function. I think it's a place, frankly, where the system has not worked as we would hope, at least during my tenure now in the legislature.
Well, and Senator, as you know, we're always willing to come and brief the legislature. As an example, last week we went to Transportation Committee and gave an overview on the work we've been doing on vehicle standards. We're always happy to come and do that. We do want to emphasize the importance of having the multi-year encumbrance ability because the bond sales have been so erratic, so we do appreciate that quite a bit. Okay.
Motion to approve the staff recommendation? Yes,
I have a question.
Senator Lowenthal, thank you.
First, I'd like to preface this by saying I think you've done a great job in this area.
Thank you,
Senator. When I first came to the legislature, we had among the dirtiest ports in the world, and now we have the cleanest ports in the world in terms of pollution. That does not mean we've solved all these problems, but I think that the steps and the leadership of the Air Resources Board has been exemplary. The questions I have are, one, we started with $1 billion. How much money do we have left?
$560 million or so.
Well, we've spent actually about $250 million. We had bond sales in June of 2010 for another $250 million. The grant agreements for those are going to go out in December and January. So we will have spent about $500,000. We're still waiting for the $500 million. We're still waiting for the other.
So there's about $500 million left. Are we talking primarily about cold ironing? Are we talking about the ability to engage in electrification, which is that the major source of...
Those are the major types of projects that would need a longer period for expenditure generally, but we're talking about a range of projects, trucks and other things. It's a mix, yeah.
Which gets back to that issue that there are some projects that are long range and quite expensive and take time and need oversight in their input, and possibly other projects.
But 80% of the monies are expended within 3 years.
Yeah.
We have, in our guidelines that we've adopted, we specify the categories for allocation. About $700 million have gone to trucks.
Right.
Many of those being port trucks. So to date, we've allocated about the money for about 5,000 truck, either retrofit or replacements. Another $160 million goes to the shore power and other types of cargo handling. Most of that money will be shore power related, and then the residuals for locomotives and things like hovercraft.
Since this is such an important part of our economy in California, this is really one of the major driving forces. I concur with the chair that by having oversight is not an attempt to slow down this process, but to see how it's being implemented. It's really important for this committee to understand that. And I concur. I don't know how we're going to work this out in terms of what projects need to have a longer time, what do not. But I think the oversight is very important, and not from a we got you, but really to understand where we're going and what the process is.
I agree, and we're pleased. Really, we are pleased to share the information whenever you want to create a forum for doing that.
Well, the chair has an idea about how we're going to do that.
That's right, and Finance did, I thought, did us a service of clarifying. We are still talking about 3 years for liquidation. The challenge here, if you look at the bottom of page 9 of the published agenda, is the governor's proposal is to allow liquidation of encumbrances until June 30, 2019, up to 6 years for liquidation, as I understand the proposal, after the 3 years for encumbrance.
It's not after. It's just they're two separate.
2 years. It's 2 years for encumbrances and then 6 years for liquidation.
Total of 8 years.
Right, which is essentially the same. We've added 1 year to what has been the legislatively authorized time period in every other budget year. So that's the difference. Is the only difference in actually what we were requesting from previous years is the additional 1 year for encumbrance.
All right.
So that's been there all along.
I'd ask for approval of the staff recommendation and, again, direction to see if we can't find some accommodation through the conference committee process. Motion to that effect.
So moved.
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal. Call the roll.
Senator Smithson?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. All right. That takes us to item number 2, and this is the committee issue. This is with respect to the administration's renewable portfolio standard activity, which continues, notwithstanding some concern about circumvention of legislative authority, to put it bluntly. Are you the two who got sent to deal with this issue today?
I guess so, yes.
Anybody else?
All right. Well, here's where we are. We had legislation in 2009 which passed both houses of the legislature, which the governor, then Governor Schwarzenegger, vetoed, and then, of course, issued an executive order. There are real limits to, and let me just say, in fairness to the previous governor, delighted that he shared the commitment towards 33% by 2020, but real concerns about what can be done appropriately, lawfully, with the administrative action and pursuant to an executive order. And my understanding and recollection on AB 32, which is the umbrella that's been used here, as I recall, the statutory language was pretty clear about the fact that pursuant to AB 32, the duties and obligations and responsibilities and authority of other departments and agencies and entities were not to be assumed for purposes of moving AB 32 forward. We have a PUC. They function pursuant to statutory direction. The existing law on the books, which was SB 107, that set the 20% renewable standard for 2010, specifically precludes the PUC from imposing an obligation over 20% on our investor-owned utilities. So we're headed, absent some statutory authorization and clarity, we're headed towards, I think, litigation from folks who are going to say that this is not only specifically precluded by state law, but that this is beyond the scope of AB 32, given the language of AB 32. I know in the past Ms. Nichols has been pretty good about saying out loud, yes, we all agree we need a statute. And, of course, last year we were trying again to get to yes with the governor, came up a little bit short on time at the end of the session. But the concern I have is that this action is clearly inconsistent with legislative direction that's already in place, and we continue to see the expenditure of funds. So why don't I stop there, ask the LAO to present briefly on this, and then go to you, and let's have some conversation.
Okay, sir.
Mr. Chair, you did a wonderful job with that summary. I would say at this point that does reflect our analysis from last year, and I would ask the board to follow up basically with what's happened since the committee essentially denied funding for any sort of development of a regulation last year.
Now,
okay. Well, a few points. Of course, we don't believe we're circumventing the legislature or legislative intent. What we believe is that the work we're doing is important to keeping California moving forward to a 33% RPS by 2020. We've been working very closely with our other agencies, the California Public Utilities Commission and the California Energy Commission and the Independent System Operator as well, on making sure that we collaborate carefully on moving in the direction as mandated by the executive order, envisioned in the ARB scoping plan, and also envisioned in the legislative efforts. I will repeat Chairman Nichols' comments, which is the prior administration and this administration both believe that a statutory clarification is ideal. But in the meantime, we don't have time, we really are short on time to achieve our objective, and we need to move forward.
Yes, and the administration might have thought of that when they vetoed the legislation in 2009.
I understand. We've just, we were directed by the executive order to move forward. We've been doing it, I think, very successfully in a very open, public manner and working closely with our other agencies. In the meantime, of course, we're pleased to continue to work with the legislature. The new administration, I know, wants to work with you and others on coming up with a successful legislative solution so we can make sure that we stay on the right track towards the RPS goals.
Entirely apart from the issue of 33% 2020 as a policy issue, there's a separation of powers issue here. There's a matter of administrative law. An executive order does not empower the governor to make law, and it does not empower the governor to make law contrary to existing statute. Existing statute, and this will, and this is coming from me of all people, this is, a bit unlikely, but existing statute specifically provides that the PUC is not to require anyone to produce more than 20% renewable as part of their portfolio. We've got an executive order now that presumes that under the authority in AB 32, it can go to 33%. I think it's fair to say you're going to get an argument on that from folks who...
I think that's true.
And
yes.
and I'm in the unfortunate and unlikely position of thinking they've got a point to be made. If we could do it all by executive order, we could send 120 folks home for the year, and it doesn't work that way. So the staff recommendation, in my judgment, is not sort of about the underlying policy issue here. It's about whether or not this is appropriate. And while you all may feel that it's been a successful effort, I will just tell you that the markets across the country are more than a little anxious about the ambiguity about who's on first and what's on second as a result of an agency taking off on this direction when there's statutory direction to the contrary, and when at the end of the day we need a statute on the books, or the confidence in the market's just not going to be there. So we have a recommendation from staff to reduce the budget item by $2 million, and I want to note, going back to the LAO's comment, that is specifically for activities related to the 33% renewable portfolio standard and/or the renewable energy standard rulemakings and proceedings. And LAO, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I thought the question you asked was, didn't your budget get reduced last year? And if it got reduced for this purpose, how is it that you continued to move forward on this item with no funding available for that purpose? Did I get that right? Let's get the answer to that question before we ask for a motion.
The money was restored in the final version of the budget, so the budget dollars were never. We never lost those dollars.
Right.
I'd also like to say that the $2 million is much higher than our current workload on this. We're finalizing the rule, but it certainly doesn't approach a $2 million level of effort at this point.
Consider me unpersuaded. Mr. Lowenthal?
I have a question. How do we deal with the fact if the legislature ultimately, and hopefully will, the statutory authorization to move to a 33%, and you've already engaged in rulemaking that's in conflict with that?
We have not yet completed the rulemaking, so it is an official, regulation on the books. We still have a little bit of work to do on that. So there would be two courses of actions. If the legislation was passed and approved prior to the completion of that process, we would just stop effort on it, and by the way the regulatory process works, it would just die off. Mm-hmm. The second, if we finish the rulemaking prior to the legislation being adopted, then we would come back to the board and rescind the regulation.
I would just like to say I concur with the chair that while it's a very admirable course that you're taking, I think it's highly questionable that you can proceed without the statutory authorization from the legislature.
Senator Fuller.
Well, I think I'd like to ask the chair to split the two items for me, because while I think that we need to move forward with the recommendation for cutting the $2 million, I'm not sure that I'm ready, as such a new person on the committee, to create the presumption that the word require or direct the group to move forward on an unknown date year and an unknown percentage year, and maybe create an unfunded mandate, or I think if we wait just a little bit, I'm understanding it's about to be resolved anyway, and then I would be more comfortable with getting on board at that point. So if we can split the motion into two pieces, that would help me. One being the $2 million reduction, and the other being the requirement to direct ARB to develop a 33% renewable energy standard.
All right.
Am I with you at all, or
no? Very clear,
okay,
and happy to ask the maker of the motion to divide the motion.
I would make the motion to split it. First, to recommend that we reduce the ALB budget item number, whatever that number is, it's beyond me, by $2 million specifically for activities related to the 33% renewable portfolio standard and/or renewable energy standard rulemaking and proceedings.
That will be a standalone motion. Last comments?
We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Call the roll.
Senator Simonian.
Aye.
Senator Fuller.
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal.
Aye. And the second one
passes 3-0.
To require the department to return in spring with a plan to work with the legislature to develop appropriate legislation guiding the development of a renewable energy standard. So moved.
Call the roll.
Senator Simonian.
Aye.
Senator Fuller.
No.
Senator Lowenthal.
Aye.
Passes 2-1. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. All right. That takes us to Department of Pesticide Regulation. And we have a discussion item here. This is budget change proposal number 1, item number 1 on page 12 of our published agenda. And why don't we just go ahead and ask the department representative to introduce herself again and present the item.
Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Mary Ann Warmerdam. I'm the Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And we have before you in the governor's budget a VCP which would propose essentially upgrading the laboratory that is currently operated and owned by the California Department of Food and Agriculture, which is the entity that has the capability to analyze all our samples, ranging from samples for enforcement actions to air, water, and soil monitoring sampling. We have had a long history with the Department of Food and Agriculture in terms of utilizing their lab. It has been a successful partnership. Unfortunately, over the years, for a variety of reasons, the required upgrades have not been timely. And suffice it to say that the current equipment, as well as the screens associated with that equipment, is fully amortized, fully depreciated. And over the years, we have approved newer chemistries in the state of California. Most of those chemistries are lower toxicity chemistries, but nonetheless, it is appropriate and imperative that we have these screens available, so if there is a problem, that we can appropriately respond as in either an enforcement action or mitigation related to the use of that particular chemistry.
Just two questions. One is, did you all look at other options rather than continuing to work with the Food and Ag? And the other question is, how many permanent positions does this end up generating at Food and Ag as a result of the proposal?
The first question, Mr. Chair, we have looked at other options, not only with respect to informing our decision in the current proposal, but also in past years. We are statutorily prohibited from looking at outside consultants if the state can do the work. And in this particular case, we do have state capacity to do the work. We've also looked at whether or not it might be more cost-effective to use facilities with the UC, the University of California, or the California State University systems, and those particular facilities do not have the capability at the scale that is required for the work that we do. We have some 8,000 samples and 700,000 screenings in any given year. And the other option would be to go to our sister agencies. And the polite response is something along the lines of, we would be delighted to work with you, but we are already fully encumbered with our own work. And thank you for the opportunity, but we don't have the capacity. And we have had a very good working relationship with the Department of Food and Agriculture, and I believe we continue to be the largest client of that particular facility. With respect to the PYs associated with this particular proposal, I believe that the department is considering redirecting 3 PYs from an existing program to fund this particular action. I also believe the department is here. If you have more specific questions with respect to staffing, I would defer to them.
Thank you. Committee members, we have a staff recommendation to approve the request. Chair is prepared to support the staff recommendation and would entertain a motion to that effect. Senator Fuller.
I just want to preface my vote with I probably will be voting no on this, but I want you to know that I may change my mind later down the road, and I'm voting no on this at this time because in my last life, I had a very large budget, and when equipment was the first thing we froze when we got into situations like this. I'm not really familiar with the kind of equipment you're thinking about needing. It might be an emergency situation. I'm not unable to determine at this time, but I am concerned that the ongoing money, given our current budget situations, might result in a fee increase, and I'm not completely sure of whether the equipment involved is going to be something that's like becoming an emergency situation. So for the time being, I'm going to vote no, but down the road, as I get more familiar with the issues, I'm prefacing that I might be thinking differently. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to try to answer those questions, or we could come by and brief you if that's more convenient.
That would be great if you could come by. That would be great.
I will just mention that we do in the out years, we've got a pretty strong history of growth in the mill assessment, which is our funding revenue, that we believe will support the ongoing out year costs. And we also, the director has the authority to raise the mill up to 21, and it's capped at 21. So that is the limitation of our ability to raise fees at this point in time.
And what is it at now?
Oh, it is at 21.
It is at 21.
Yes, it is. Which plays out to 2.1 cents per dollar of sales in California for the materials we regulate.
Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I have some questions, not quite germane to this, but I would just like your. And are you at all considering developing a private foundation to, from the pesticide industry to fund your programs?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to the motion, I do want to just check in with the LAO. Any comment on this item? Finance, any comment on this item? Again, public, if there are folks who wish to speak, just simply stand up and make your way forward. All right. Thank you, Senator Lowenthal. Motion?
I move to approve the request.
All right. Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
No.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
2-1. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Chair, members, thank you.
All right, that ends the Department of Pesticide Regulation discussion, and that brings us to State Water Resources Control Board. This is a case where we've split the vote-only calendar based on some concerns around fees, which we anticipate. So the first item is proposed for vote only, and this is, unless there's objection or public comment, we'll take a single vote on the vote-only items 1 and 2. These are contained on our page 13 of the published agenda. Any reason we can't just go right ahead on those two items? All right, then motion to approve items 1 and 2, BCP 3, BCP 4, as on page 13.
So moved.
Motion by Lowenthal. Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
All right, that passes 3-0. Thank you very much. Then that brings us to 3 more items, items 3, 4, and 5. These are on page 14 and 15 of the agenda. I'm going to ask that we take item 5 off the vote-only agenda so we can have some conversation about that. That would leave items 3 and 4 on the vote-only agenda if we had a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Motion by Lowenthal. Call the roll on items 3 and 4.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller? Aye. Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
All right. Those 2 items are approved. Item number 5 was originally slated for a vote only, and the question I have for folks who are here from the board is, are we talking about charging a fee when the court has told us at the appellate level no can do? And if so, what's the rationale for that?
This is Tom Howard, Executive Director, State Water Board. I have Darren Polhemus, Deputy Director, with me. The Court of Appeal made a finding that 30% of the board's activities are associated with pre-1914 excuse me, and riparian water right issues. And because the pre-1914 and riparian water right holders do not pay fees, that was considered to be inappropriate for the board to be collecting fees and then providing services for those parties. The board factually had disputed that issue, and that was one of the issues brought to the Supreme Court. Our close assessment of our activities indicates that about $1 million of the $16 million budget that the Water Board has actually is used to provide services to riparians and pre-1914s. Consequently, the proposal that's before you is consistent with our interpretation as it presently exists as to how much money is being spent on the permittees and how much on the others. And so we're proposing that of our $16.2 million budget that all but $1 million of it be paid with fees, and that $1 million of it remain as general fund in order to support the board's activities for pre-1914 and riparian water right holders.
And does that mean then we're talking about the $6.4 million number as being fee supported? Is that how we get to that number?
Right now, the fund, I think, has the water right fund is proposing to collect about to have about an expenditure in water rights of $16.2 million, and out of that, about $12 million of it is with fees, and about $4 million of it is general fund. So we're proposing to shift $3 million to fees and leave $1 million as general fund. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
Well, as I look at page 15 of the published agenda, it says shifting the funding of the balance of these core regulatory activities from the general fund to fees would save the general fund $6.4 million in the budget year. Ms. Freeman, you want to help? That's all three. I see. All right. So that's a reference not just to item BCP 4 under item 5. It's inclusive.
The others too as well.
Right. But back to my central question, and maybe finance wants to. So the obvious question is: so what if we lose again and we've been collecting the fees? What happens then?
Well, at this point, we intend, since the court has finally heard this, we should get an opinion within 90 days. I think by March is the deadline to hear. At that time, the court will provide direction as to whether or not there really is a problem with the fees, and we'll have to reassess at that point whether or not the fees that the water board has adopted is consistent or needs to be amended. And when we go through the amendment process, we would have to recalculate the fees, and there's a potential there would have to be money given back to some of the fee payers, depending on how the recalculated fees are calculated based on the court's direction.
Finance, what's your take on this?
We have nothing to add. Ellen Moratti, Department of Finance. We have nothing to add.
I'm going to come back to finance in a minute, and the question I'm going to ask you is, does the administration think it's a sound practice to impose fees when we've got a court at the appellate level that tells us that the fees are not supportable? And I'm going to come back to that after I ask the LAO.
Mr. Chair and members, Mark Newton with the LAO. Just a quick comment and a bit of history here, and something that may help clarify matters for the committee too. The legislature in 2003 adopted a water rights fee, and this was pursuant to an LAO recommendation that the regulatory activities of the water rights program are appropriately funded by fees, and the legislature agreed. The legislation was fairly broadly written and gave the authority to the water board to develop the fee regulation. So what is at issue, and please correct me, water board, if I'm misspeaking here, is not the concept of a fee and the legality of a water rights fee. It's simply the design of the fee under the water board's regulations. So if the final court decision determines that another fee structure is more appropriate from a legal point of view, the regulation would be redesigned, and there still could be the authority to collect fees. It would be just under a different design. So
and presumably at a different level.
At potentially a different level.
Finance?
Jesse McGuinn, Department of Finance. I think we agree with the assessment that the LAO has presented, that they need to move forward with their program in absence of, this is going through the appellate court. They have the authority to do the fees. And again, it's the application, not the actual imposition of the fees, that is at issue. But the point with this proposal was to remove the general fund.
I understand that, folks. Let me try again. If I can, government costs money. Somebody's got to pay for it. In a number of circumstances, we make the determination that fee ought to be charged, and I am prepared and have been prepared to support the use of fees to pay the reasonable cost of government. We have a debate that, in my judgment, has not been all that productive in the legislature over the years about this issue, but as someone who does support fees where they're appropriate, whether it's polluter pays, beneficiary pays, which I've supported, I think it's important to be intellectually honest about the difference between a fee and a tax. So I try very hard, if I support a fee, to make sure that it's not a tax that is being called a fee. And in this case, I don't for a minute doubt the fee authority, but you're asking us to save general fund dollars by the application of a particular fee schedule, which, if I understand it correctly, the appellate court has told us is an unlawful application of the fee. Do I have my facts wrong?
Mr. Chair, if I may comment, Anton Favarini-Chorba with the Analyst's Office. My understanding, and the board can correct me, is that the portion of the fees that are paying for the regulatory programs that cover the non-pre-1914 and non-riparian, so basically everyone else, and groundwater, which is unregulated, those fees are appropriately funded under the beneficiary pays principle because the water rights holders coming to the board and applying for permits are benefiting by having a centralized registry of water rights that ensures that no one's taking more than their fair share and that no one is violating the terms of their permits.
Well, I'm going to read. Forgive me. I'm going to read the sentence from the analysis here, which says, while a superior court upheld the fee statutes and associated regulations in their entirety, the Court of Appeal found that in some specific instances, about 30% of activities associated with pre-1914 and riparian rights, the benefits accruing to the fee payers were not sufficiently proportional to the size of the fee, and the related regulations were overturned. Were the related regulations overturned?
The Court of Appeal did overturn them, and then they were heard by the Supreme Court. But as this...
Hang on just a second.
Sure.
So those are the regulations pursuant to which the fee was being collected, yes?
Yes.
Well, let me go back to finance. Finance is the argument basically, yes, we know that the Court of Appeals has told us that this is an unlawful fee, but we're feeling pretty good about our chances at the Supreme Court, and we'd like to move forward at this point anyway so that we have this structure in place. If we win, and if we don't win, then we'll deal with that problem when it arises. Is that kind of where we are?
Yes.
Okay. My understanding is that the Assembly's already taken action on this item, and that they've approved the item. I'm gonna, contrary to the staff recommendation, I'm gonna ask for a motion to deny and get this sorted out in conference. But I'm not comfortable voting to authorize a fee which at present time has been adjudicated as unlawful. That's just so. Is there a motion to deny?
Motion to deny.
Any further discussion? The motion is to deny. Call a roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller? Aye. Senator Lowenthal?
Aye. Motion denied, and look forward to a happy outcome on that one. That takes us to next item for discussion, which is item number 6, the budget change proposal number 2, which is at page 16 of our published agenda. This item, Ms. Fuller, we heard this item last year and continue to have some concerns, obviously, about the implementation of the program. The department has submitted to the legislature a required action plan for the program addressing some of the concerns that were raised in the 2010 program audit, which are referenced in the agenda. And frankly, the issue is complex enough that I think the staff recommendation anticipates that we'd come back in the spring when we could have a full update from the board and determine what the adequate funding levels for the program would be. So why don't we get a brief comment from the board and then see if we can just go ahead and take action to that effect.
Sure. A very brief comment is that there was an audit in February of 2010, and in supplemental report language requested or required the Water Board to submit an update on what we're doing to implement the audit, and that was scheduled for to be submitted to the legislature in January, and that report was provided to the committee. So you have an up-to-date description of all of our activities to implement the audit. I think we've made tremendous progress, and I think that's reflected in the report that was submitted to you.
All All right. Then the staff recommendation is to deny without prejudice, and we'll come back in the spring after we've had a chance to analyze the progress that's been made.
So moved.
Call the roll.
Senator
I'm sorry, hang on. I didn't mean to cut off Senator Fuller.
I just have a couple comments. And I'm supporting the measure as approved, but when you bring back your updated piece, I'm very, very interested in how we're paying the claims, how many we have in each fund, all of that information. We don't need to do it today, but we have had a lot of concerns in my district coming to me saying that their claims aren't being paid, claims are being late. After the fact, they're being audited, sort of, so they never know how much they're going to get. Like, when they bring their stuff in, why isn't there a head review so that there's not one receipt holding them up? And some of these claims have not been paid for, like, a long number of years. So I'll just be interested in you updating me at that point. And if you have other information and you'd like to come by my office, I'd love to entertain that. Thank you.
Oh, we'd be happy to come by and provide you a detailed briefing.
Thank you.
All right. Then we have a motion on this. Senator Lowenthal, thank you. Call the roll. Deny without prejudice. Come back in the spring.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Passes 3-0. That takes us to item number 7, BCP 7, Budget Change Proposal 7, to augment basin planning and water quality standards program. Why don't we ask LAO to briefly present this item and share their recommendations?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Basin Planning and Water Quality Standards Program we feel is appropriately funded through fees because it's an application of the polluter pays principle. As discussed in the staff comments, the planning process is integral to some of the core regulatory programs of the Water Board. Basically, if you can't plan, you don't know where to set the total daily maximum load limits and a variety of other requirements and regulations. The $6.1 million in funding plus the $700,000 in reimbursements would make this program entirely funded through fees on polluters.
All right. Finance, anything on this item?
Ellen Moriarty, Department of Finance again. I'd like to make one point of clarification because I think there may be some confusion about what is included in the administration's proposal. This proposal is $6.1 million plus the reimbursements mentioned by LAO for basin planning. It does not include what is known as TMDL, or the total maximum daily load.
Okay. Anything from the board?
No, I think that summed it up nicely.
Good. Members of the public, if any? Committee members? Great. Thanks. You just use the microphone right here, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Wendy Ritter-Bush with the Association of California Water Agencies. In the interest of brevity, we would just say that all these impacts are cumulative. Water agencies are in a state of fiscal duress right now with enterprise special property tax dollars at risk, increased fees, a 2012 water bond in question. So we would just say that we would hope that the committee would consider the cumulative impacts on water agencies of this potential cut.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair, members.
There you go.
Glenn Farrell with the Friant Water Authority. Concur with Ms. Ritter-Bush's comments. Just add on to that by saying, when we have these cumulative effects and when they all get passed through to local agencies and we have to pass them through to the exact same end user every single time, we have to go run the gauntlet of Prop 218 elections, and especially in rural communities, irrigation districts, agricultural water suppliers, Prop 218 challenges are difficult to overcome, and so we end up with the burden of not being able to pass these through to our customers, and so we end up, financially insecure in terms of securing additional water supplies and completing projects that we need to deliver water supplies to our agricultural customers.
Thank you. Next witness.
We're back.
Good to see you.
Gail Delahunt with Western Growers, and I must concur with Wendy's assessment of the
the cumulative effect. My grower, one grower could possibly be subject to at least 3 of these fee increases. And so proportionately, we can't pass those costs on to our people who buy our food. So we would appreciate you looking at that.
Thank you.
Valerie Nero for the California Chamber of Commerce. We too are really concerned with the cumulative effect. Some of my members could be just under the NPDES permit, anywhere from 13% to 20% increase. That doesn't entertain the increase that would come from the basin planning fees. That's quite a large jump in the fee schedules for just a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mr. Chair, members, Kendra Dijogo with the Guaco Group on behalf of the Agricultural Council of California, the California Association of Pest Control Advisors, the Kings River Conservation District, and the Southern San Joaquin Valley Water Quality Coalition. Quite a mouthful. We appreciate the action that you previously have taken on the water rights provisions that were before you, but we are still concerned about the rest of the fees, and some of which were on the vote-only calendar. So the cumulative impacts, along with regulatory and new legislation that has been passed recently, have become burdensome. So we'd like for you to take that into consideration.
Thanks. Next witness.
Crystal Jack on behalf of the California Citrus Mutual, California Cotton Growers Association, California Tomato Growers Association, Nisei Farmers League, Western Agricultural Processors Association, and Western Plant Health Association. I'd like to reiterate the concerns previously stated on this issue as well as the vote-only issues.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and members, Bill McGavin with Sierra Club, California. I move to try to provide some balance to the testimony by supporting the recommendation. We think the basin planning program is very important and that the reasoning of the LAO and the staff in recommending this fund shift is sound, so we support.
Thank you. Just by way of response, mostly so folks know that they got heard, 2 different issues. One is I do feel, as I said earlier, that it's important when we impose fees that the fees be lawful, appropriate, that the nexus that's necessary be established. And I think that is the case here. That being said, I think we're all mindful of the fact that it adds up and that that cost is real over time. I want to say I think we're having an interesting debate in California that could be a little crisper about to what extent are we prepared as a state to fund programs and services as a contribution to the common good, and to the extent that we're not prepared to do that, then fees are going to be necessary to provide for the programs and services that are deemed essential. So I'm not being flip when I say the folks who are anxious about the cumulative impact of these fees have a vested interest in the state's ability to impose a more broadly based measure of support, and I hope you'll keep that in mind as the governor is trying to make his case for the maintenance of existing tax revenues, because when those tax revenues disappear, then people immediately turn to your pockets and say, are there fees that can appropriately be assessed in the absence of broader support from the public? And that is a conversation that's playing out on every issue in our budget. So there needs to be a linkage and an understanding of that linkage in the public debate that we have about when are taxes appropriate and at what level, and for what purposes that serve the common good. And as I say, absent those revenues, we're going to be having more conversations like this, meeting after meeting, year after year. Other members of the committee who want to weigh in on this subject, Senator Fuller.
Well, I'd just sort of like to ask the Commission, under Proposition 26, do you believe these fee increases will require a 2/3 vote?
Our understanding is that they won't, but I would defer to Department of Finance in that matter.
Just to respond to your question, we do see a direct relationship between the fee that would be charged and the services provided to the fee payers. So we think that, under normal circumstances, a majority vote would suffice. However, if this is urgency legislation, you'll need a 2/3 vote.
Is there a complication from the fact that the public, isn't the public receiving a benefit from basin planning and water quality management activities, but there's no fee for that currently?
If I can help, Senator Fuller, I understand your question to be, if there is a broader public benefit, then should the full cost be attributable to fees, or should some portion of the cost be attributable to the broader public benefit and therefore not appropriately supported by fees? Did I get the question right?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Is that a complexity that figures in?
My response would be that the basin plans operate as a roadmap for us to develop permits, and so we believe that it's appropriate for the permit holders to pay for the planning activities that support that.
Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I have.
I'm sorry, Senator Fuller, were you done? I didn't mean to catch you.
Yes, I'm still registering all. Thank you.
All right. Senator.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on something I asked before. Since we're talking about funding and fees, my question is, does the Water Board have any plans to develop a fundraising foundation funded by either beneficiaries or polluters?
No.
Thank you.
All right. LAO, did you have a comment you wanted to make on this item?
If I can just address Senator Fuller's question. The regulatory programs that are being funded by this are involved in regulating the discharges to the environment from polluters. The polluter, and so we feel that it's more appropriate for the polluters to pay the full cost of that, because it sort of brings in line their cost with the true cost to society. So the polluter pays principle, basically. Does that?
All right.
Maybe just to quickly add to that, I think, Senator Fuller, you're asking a legal question of interpreting Proposition 26, where there is a provision that deems a payment for a regulatory activity, sort of a fee, to not be a tax, and how broadly that will be interpreted, and whether it will interpret regulatory-like activities that perhaps also have a broad public benefit. I guess that's open to interpretation, but at least from a preliminary view, we would agree through with the board that this appears to fit within the exemption in Proposition 26 for regulatory activities.
All right. Any further comment? If not, can we get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller? No. Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Passes 2-1. Thank you very much. And that ends our State Water Resources Control Board and takes us to the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Thank you very much, gentlemen. All right. We have a couple of items here for vote only that are contained on page 18. Any desire to have members of the public speak, weigh in? All right. If not, we could just take a motion.
Motion to approve items 1 and 2.
All right. Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
All right. And that takes us to the proposed discussion item on page 19 of our published agenda, and this is the land transfer. This is BCP 1, item number 3, the land transfer of the Santa Susana Laboratory to the state. And as I understand it, the department has indicated that the positions requested do not commit the state to accept the land transfer upon completion of the investigation, the feasibility review, and the cleanup phases. So there is not a concern with the position request to support that investigation study and cleanup. Why don't we ask the department to give a brief comment on the proposal and the committee's recommendation?
Okay, I'm Acting Director Leonard Robinson from the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and I brought my Deputy for Legislation, Rick Brausch, and the proposal is to take 3.0 interim positions and make them permanent positions for the cleanups, study and cleanup of the Santa Susana Field Lab. Very complex radioactive chemical contamination. The contamination in the soil is not expected to be cleaned up till 2017. The groundwater, maybe a couple of thousand years.
I noticed 50,000 is on page 19. Is that that's not hyperbole? That's a real estimate of 50,000?
Again, Rick Broush with the TSC, also the Santa Susana Field Lab project director. It is, in essence, kind of an extrapolation of some numbers based on the yield of the groundwater wells beneath the site. 10 gallons per year with 500,000 gallons of product in the soil, in the groundwater. So, not hyperbole, unfortunately.
All right. So, given term limits, it'll be after we're all gone.
Yeah.
All right. The staff recommendation is to approve with budget bill language in order to ensure that that there is not a perpetuation of the positions after the work is done. You've looked at the budget bill language. You're comfortable with that budget bill language?
Yes.
Okay. LAO, everything okay by you? Finance?
We have no concerns with the budget language.
Okay.
We have, Ellen Moretti, we have no concerns with the proposed language for the budget year.
Thank you. Members of the public?
Bill McGavin with Sierra Club, California. We have for many years been supporting the full cleanup of Santa Susana pursuant to SB 990, a Kuehl-Brownlee bill, and the department's been making great progress with the agreement for the full cleanup. So we think it's very important to fund these positions. The plan has really never included a transfer of the property to the state, so we also very much support the staff recommendation to make it clear that no land transfer is authorized.
Members, the proposed budget bill language is that item 3960-001-0014, no positions approved under this item shall be used to investigate or work on a transfer of land between the responsible parties at Santa Susana Field Laboratory and the state of California. The staff recommendation is to approve item 3 with that budget bill language.
So moved.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Fuller? Comment or question?
I just was going to ask why, given how long out it is and all the other issues, it wasn't a limited term position other than a permanent position.
Well, they were originally created as limited term, and then this, in fact, is kind of a re-extension of those limited term positions. And I guess I would defer to finance on kind of the policy and procedures related to limited term and the duration.
Generally, the practice is that if a position is needed for up to 2 years, we schedule it as limited term. These positions are needed for 5 years. So we're requesting permanent status. If the department is interested in redirecting the positions after 5 years, they could come forward with the BCP to propose new activities for those positions.
But the funding source is not ongoing, is that correct?
These positions are all cost recovery positions, so that the responsible parties for the contamination are paying the full cost of the position and overhead.
Once it's cleaned up, it's not ongoing. Right?
Correct.
So you have I'm new. So you have a permanent employee. Now you have a job that's of a defined length that's going to go away at a certain time for sure. We're not even sure we have the job, but if we think we will. So I'm just a little concerned with why we would add more permanent positions at a time when our budget is shaky. Like, what is the advantage of it gives you less flexibility to have a permanent employee when you might, after this is done, admittedly, they're going to go away.
I guess the idea here is that this is not the only project the department works on of this type, cleanup projects. So to the extent that we have a position when this project, I'm crossing my fingers, is complete in that 2017 timeframe, other projects of like type where these positions and these qualifications are necessary to engage for that oversight function can be substituted in. So the like work, the like function, the like position all will just be directed to other projects that the department has that will continue on.
In the event, because these positions are funded by the entity cleaning up property, when they clean it up, the funding goes away. So the department would then be forced to take an action with regard to these permanent positions because they'd have no funding behind them. So they would either need to redirect them to someplace where they have a funding source, or to submit a negative BCP to eliminate the positions, or they could administratively eliminate the positions through a personnel process with what's called a 607, which is a personnel document. The practice and the policy of the administration and prior administrations for quite some time, I've been with finance on and off for 20 years, is that they've put a cap on limited term to 2 years. So then if at the end of the 2 years, if they need to relook at the position, then they can come back and explain why they're ongoing. In this case, we have a target date. It is 5 years out, and just based on current practice, we would then make them permanent. The department would then need to come back when the funding source goes away to determine what they're going to do.
Well, it just seems to me that prudent planning would be that you would put them on as a temp, as a limited term, and then when you get the other project, you would come back to us and you would ask for that new employee or that extension. And if we are going to do oversight, I think that that's what we would want to ask for. But I totally am happy with the budget bill language, so I'm just a little conflicted over, as an old administrator who never put people on sort of endlessly because of all the stuff you have to go through to let them go. I just think you aren't getting the flexibility you need, and that it's a little difficult for me to be in that position. So
Go to LAO.
I don't know what suggestions we have about
any of your concerns.
Leah Moore, Legislative Analyst's Office. The department had also indicated to us previously that one of the benefits of a permanent positions versus limited term is that because these are such highly technical positions, they're having a hard time filling them when it's a limited term. If they're considered permanent positions, they have more interested applicants that are at the education and skill level that they require.
Senator.
They're converting. They already have found these people, have they not? This is not seeking out new people. We're talking about whether the issue is, can they be extended now as limited term positions for 5 years, or do we convert them? So I think it's a different issue.
Correct. As a general rule of thumb, limited term positions are more difficult to fill. In this particular instance, we have been able to recruit and hire into these positions, so they are filled. So while in a general sense the limited term overlay does create some limitations and challenges, in this particular instance that's not a particular factor right now.
So I guess it's more of a question to us, how much oversight capability we want to have, and whether we split the motion or change the motion, or I will support your motion, whichever way, Chair, you decide to make it, but because I'm new, but in the future I will always opt for more oversight. Thank you.
Senator, would you like to divide the motion so that we approve the item and the budget bill language separately?
That would be great.
Great. I'm sure, Senator Lowenthal, would you be willing to simply offer up a motion initially to approve item number 3 and then a separate motion for the budget bill language?
Absolutely.
All right. Why don't we go with the Chair will entertain a motion to approve item 3. Thank you, Senator Lowenthal, for that motion. Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
I'm sorry.
You would should vote no.
Yeah,
Abstain.
I'm sorry.
Senator Fuller?
No. I thought this was the budget bill.
Forgive me. All right.
Excuse me.
That measure passes 2-1. Then, Senator Lowenthal, could I ask you for, or Senator Fuller, could I ask you for a motion to approve the recommended budget bill language? Motion by Fuller. Call a roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye. Senator
Lowenthal?
Aye.
And that measure passes 3-0. Thank you. That ends our Department of Toxic Substance Control and takes us to OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And this is our last department of the day. And can we ask folks to come forward, please? And if you'd introduce yourselves for the committee and for the public, please. There we go.
Senator Samitian, my name is Joan Denton. I'm the director of the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment.
Thank you. And with you is?
My name's Alan Hirsch. I'm Chief Deputy Director at OEHA.
All right. And before we get to our item, Ms. Denton, not everyone will know that you have been in this position since 1997 and served 3 different governors at this point, if I have my facts right. 29 years of service. I think it's appropriate at this time we say thank you. So just if you wondered if anybody was paying attention and appreciating it, the answer is, and now we're on 4.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I'm sure I will definitely miss the budget hearings.
Now I know how you've lasted so long. We have a discussion item here, and this is the Proposition 65 fund shift, and we're going to ask you to present the proposal, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, just to give the committee a little bit of background, the Prop 65 program is a key program within OEHA. It's about a $4 million a year program. There is one special fund which comes from penalties from enforcement cases brought on behalf of Prop 65. That's called the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Fund, and I'll just call it the Prop 65 Fund. And we project every year that about $1.1 million will come from penalties into that fund. Last budget year, because of the pressures on the general fund, the entire program was put on the Prop 65 fund, and the general fund was eliminated. As you can tell by my earlier comments, though, this is not a sustainable solution for this program because we project only $1.1 million coming in. So, as a consequence, this year we tried to address this. This fund is very volatile, as you can imagine. It fluctuates wildly. And so we in anticipation that there would not be an appropriate amount of funding in that fund to permanently support the Prop 65 activities at OEHA, we proposed this budget change proposal, which would transfer $1.1 million of the general fund back into the Prop 65 program, with the remaining being absorbed by the Prop 65 fund. However, after we prepared the budget change proposal, we revised our projections of what would be coming into that fund, and as I mentioned before, it's very volatile, and indeed we have enough money in the fund this year from those penalties in order to support the program for another year. So that's where we are, and again, given the pressures on the general fund, then we don't really need the general fund at this point to. So we have a budget change proposal on your plate. So I think yeah.
Let me just interrupt, okay. And I'll go to the LAO and to finance in a minute. The staff recommendation, because of this new information, is to deny the proposal, but to additionally increase one-time expenditure authority from the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Fund by $1.1 million.
Correct.
And then to approve supplemental report language requiring OEHA to determine the appropriateness of the toxic substances control account or other special fund sources that could be used to fund this program on an ongoing basis. Do I have that right? Okay, and
yes.
That reflects the change in circumstances. Finance, you okay with that?
Sue Montoya, Department of Finance. We do concur that subsequent to the preparation of the governor's budget, actual revenues for late November, December did come in above estimate, and therefore this program can carry through the budget year. However, as noted before, it's a $4 million base program, ongoing penalty revenues 1.1 to 1.4. The issue in this original BCP did call for twice the 1.1 million in the out years, which represented the significant additional fund shift done in the last Budget Act. So we concur that based on current updated estimates, there's not a need for general fund in the budget year. We do anticipate a need for general fund or some other funding source to support the program in the out years. The toxic substances account is certainly one that the department can look at. I believe it's currently in structural deficit, facing pressures of its own. But certainly looking at other options is a reasonable request.
All right. LAO?
We concur with the minutes.
All right. Committee members, members of the public. As I said, we do have a staff recommendation that is designed to reflect this changed circumstance, which is to deny the original proposal, but to additionally increase one-time expenditure authority from the fund by the $1.1 million that was referenced, and then to approve supplemental report language that would require OEHA to determine, to deal with these longer-term issues, the appropriateness of the toxic substances control account or some other special fund source that could be used to fund the program.
Move the staff recommendation.
We have a motion by Senator Lowenthal. Any other comments or questions? Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller?
Aye.
Senator Lowenthal?
Passes 3-0. We'll say thank you for being here today, and again, can't thank you enough. 3 decades. We'd be here a long time thanking you appropriately for that. So thank you.
Thank you very
Members,
much.
I believe
Thank
that's
you.
the last item on our agenda. Without objection, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. Thank you, people.